The NFL trade deadline has officially passed, and there were a lot of moves made this year. There were 8 trades on the day of the deadline, which dating back to 1990 was the second most trades on the day of any deadline aside from 2022 when there were 10 trades made on the day of the deadline. And between October 1st and the November 4th trade deadline, there were 18 total trades, which tied 2022 and 2024 for the most in that time period in any season. And several years ago, the NFL trade deadline was seemingly just another day. But thankfully those days are over, and in today's video we're going to break down the biggest winners and losers from the 2025 NFL trade deadline. And there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin! And we are starting today's video by discussing the Jakobi Meyers trade to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And believe it or not, Jakobi Meyers actually had over 1,000 yards last year for the Raiders. I know Brock Bowers rightfully receives a lot of love, but Meyers did go for over 1,000 yards and had at least 800 yards in each of the previous 3 seasons. And I think the Jags are winners from the trade deadline for a few reasons. Now, when I say the Jags are winners, there's a few things that have to be remembered and contextualized within this specific trade. The Jags are not exactly a Dallas Cowboys or Kansas City Chiefs in terms of media coverage, but they've had a lot of injuries at the receiver position and even tight end position so far in 2025. Travis Hunter is currently on IR, and Brenton Strange is a tight end who was slowly getting better before going down with an injury too. Brian Thomas has of course had an up and down year, but he was hurt in the Raiders game in the 4th quarter in a pretty ugly looking play, and I'll leave it at that. And when the Jags were in overtime, ironically at the time against Jakobi Meyers' Raiders, the Jags receivers were Parker Washington, Austin Trammell, and Tim Jones, so not exactly a trio that strikes fear into opposing defenses. And with the uncertainty around the Jags receiving core, I like this trade a lot for Jacksonville to bring in some stability. And if you know anything about the Jags 2025 season, then you know they've had a case of the drops for really the entire year. And at the time of this video release, Jakobi Meyers has just 2 drops on his last 174 targets, so needless to say, that is an upgrade for Jacksonville based on how their receivers have played in 2025. And one other reason I think you can consider the Jags winners from this trade is they had 13 picks prior to this trade, and for them to trade a 4 and a 6 and still have 11 picks for the 2026 draft, to me can only be viewed as a positive. And on top of it, if Jakobi Meyers leaves in free agency this year, then somebody will almost certainly pay him to the point where Jacksonville will receive a 3 or a 4 as a compensatory pick. And even if he doesn't hit free agency and the Jags pay him, are we really worried about trading a 4 and a 6 for a player who is 28 years old and is a consistent receiver, which in a lot of ways is exactly what this team needs? No. So in the worst case, he doesn't work out and you trade a 6th round pick for a rental. And in the best case, he stays in Jacksonville, provides some much needed stability, and becomes Trevor's go-to guy for the remainder of the season, due in large part to the uncertainty with the other weapons in the offense from a catching the football standpoint. And I also thought the Jags were in a vulnerable situation because, again, Tim Jones and Austin Trammell were on the field for the final play of the Raiders-Jags Week 9 game, and the reality of business is yesterday's price is not today's price. And unless Jakobi Meyers drops off the face of the earth, I fail to see any downside of this trade for the Jags. From the Raiders side, this is pretty simple. You get a 4 and a 6 for a player who is not going to be around long term. And I have been underwhelmed with the production from Raiders' 2nd round pick Jack Bech, so hopefully with the Meyers trade we start to see both Jack Bech and rookie Dante Thornton play more, but this is a classic bad team unloading a solid player to a team that needed help at the position. And if you want to say the Raiders are winners from this trade too, I personally wouldn't have a problem with it. The Raiders have a first-year GM in John Spytek, and if you are ever going to win that division, you need to build through the draft as much as possible. And truly no disrespect is meant by this, but the Raiders are not a Jakobi Meyers away from winning the AFC West. Now, if there is one thing about me, I love, it's eating. I don't eat to live, I live to eat. Whether it's chicken, pizza, steak, pasta, especially pasta, I love it all. And that's why I'm excited to tell you guys about today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh recently doubled the size of their menu to offer 100 plus recipes each week, and they're also offering bigger portions, twice as many healthy options, and 15 plus high protein recipes every week. And like I said, I live to eat. Eating is one of my favorite things to do, and the Thai-inspired steak noodle stir-fry they sent me was awesome, and they sent everything. The steak, the lo mein noodles, the mushrooms, the broccoli, they sent everything. And one of my favorite parts was the sweet soy glaze sauce they sent to, bring everything together, and it was an incredible meal, and I couldn't recommend it enough. And like we said, there are plenty of options every week. This week they sent me the Thai-inspired steak noodle stir fry, as well as chicken bacon and green pepper enchiladas, and even a sticky ponzu salmon rice bowl, all of which were awesome. And like I said, I could not recommend HelloFresh enough. And I loved each meal, and HelloFresh recipes have step-by-step instructions, which is also another bonus, and they're easy to follow. So take advantage of the new HelloFresh by using my code GFBFM at HelloFresh.com for 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life. One free meal per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box, new or returning subscribers only, and they vary by plan. So sign up today and click the link below or use my code GFBFM at HelloFresh.com. And a huge thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video. Next up is the Philadelphia Eagles, and I know a lot of people get sick of hearing how good Howie Roseman is as a GM and how Howie did it again, but I absolutely love the Jaelan Phillips trade to the Philadelphia Eagles for a couple of reasons. The first is they traded a third-round pick for a 26-year-old pass rusher who has had multiple 40-plus pressure seasons, and all the way back in 2022, he had a 70-plus pressure season. Now, since then, Jaelan Phillips has tore his Achilles and tore his ACL, so I definitely wouldn't expect that type of year for Jaelan Phillips, but to trade a third-round pick for a player who also is at a position where you desperately need help, to me, is a big win for the Philadelphia Eagles. And last year's Eagles team was really dominant defensively. Obviously, we saw that in the Super Bowl as they put on a display, play after play, and it wasn't just Cooper DeJean's pick six. I mean, they beat and battered Patrick Mahomes around all night, and he was running for his life in a lot of ways. But prior to the 2024 Eagles, a team that a couple of years ago in the earlier stages of the channel, a team that I referenced a lot that I thought was a really well-constructed and built roster was, ironically, the 2017 Eagles. And the 2017 Eagles had pass rush on pass rush on pass rush. And for reference, that year, the Eagles were led by guys like Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Chris Long, Vinnie Curry, Derek Barnett, Bo Allen, and Timmy Jernigan. And if a guy was fatigued, they had another guy come in, and there was a reason they won the Super Bowl that year. And there was a reason that they held the Falcons to less than 20 points in the divisional round. They obviously thumped the hell out of the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. And then when it mattered most, Brandon Graham made probably the most iconic play, or one of the most iconic plays in Eagles franchise history. So the reason that I like this trade a lot for the Eagles is because the Eagles' 2 Super Bowl titles have largely been predicated on pass rush. Now, I know in 2017, you had the Philly special, and then last year there were several big plays in the Super Bowl as seemingly everybody had a big play for the Eagles, but I absolutely love this trade because within this, you're getting a good pass rusher and the fact that Nolan Smith is coming back, and I also think that this will open up passing lanes and pass rush opportunities for Jay Luxunt, so that on 3rd and 11 plus, you can have 4 guys legitimately get after the quarterback, and those 4 players would be Jaelan Phillips, of course, Nolan Smith when he comes back, and his practice window was recently opened, Jay Luxunt, a player that I like a lot, and even Jalen Carter. And if you want to add a 5th in there and have it be Moro Ajomo, be my guest. So for the Eagles to trade a 3rd-round pick, I thought was a tremendous trade, and even if Jaelan Phillips is a rental and he leaves in free agency, why I like this a lot is it will be a rental for a 3rd-round pick or a rental, but the Eagles will more than likely get a 4th round as a compensatory pick back in 2027. So in a lot of ways, the trade was, hey, let's move back 50 spots in the draft, and the 50 spots where we get that from is roughly around the pick 92 to 95 area, maybe even 96 if the Eagles win the Super Bowl, to the 3rd round compensatory picks and then the 4th round. So obviously of the late couple of compensatory picks at the end of the 3rd round, the entire 4th round, and then the compensatory picks in the 4th. So it'd be like a 40 to 45 pick swap back if Jaelan Phillips leaves in free agency, and I really fail to see any downside of this trade for the Philadelphia Eagles in what could prove to be a move that pushes them over the top and propels them to a 2nd straight Super Bowl title. The Eagles also traded for Michael Carter and Jair Alexander over the past couple of weeks, and with how the Eagles' corners outside of Quinyon Mitchell have played this year, I think you have to kind of say that that's an improvement for the Eagles based on where the roster is, or at least a step in the right direction to trying to improve their corner play as we go down the stretch of the 25 season. what I would also say is remember what you gave up for the players in those trades, and do not expect a 2009 Darrelle Revis type impact from those said players, but credit Howie for at least trying to improve the roster. Now, with the Miami Dolphins trading Jaelan Phillips and nobody else, that was not a move or set of moves that I couldn't get behind. Jaelan Phillips is unfortunate because I thought this was a player that would be in Miami for not just a year or two, but really several years, as he is only 26 years old and he also played college football at Miami, and I thought there was a chance this could be a long-time Dolphin, and if everything worked out, that he could maybe have 60 or 70 career sacks, maybe make a Pro Bowl or two, and eventually be inducted into the Dolphins Ring of Honor. Unfortunately, it didn't work out like that, but what I would consider the Dolphins' losers from the trade deadline for is not trading Bradley Chubb. Now, I will cut interim GM Champ Kelly some slack by not trading Jalen Waddle, and we'll get more into that in a minute, but the Bradley Chubb contract is pretty ugly, and for the Dolphins to not unload that and to even say, hey, we will trade Bradley Chubb and a 6th in exchange for a 7th just to be able to free up cap space next year, because the Dolphins are probably going to have a very difficult decision to make on quarterback Tua Tagovailoa and whether or not they are going to flat out release Tua, or because nobody's going to trade for Tua next year because of his enormous contract. So any financial freedom that the Dolphins could have had from the Bradley Chubb contract, if there was an opportunity for them to trade him for even a 6th round pick, would have been a net positive for Miami, because we can call it what it is based on the ramifications they're going to have from the Tua contract and all of the after effects that they're going to have from that. They could have used any financial freedom they could have received. So I did not like the fact that Miami only traded Jaelan Phillips and did not also trade Bradley Chubb within that, and I guess you could also apply that to Minkah Fitzpatrick and Rasul Douglas too. But I do think the Dolphins, if there is any win they had from the trade deadline, it would be the fact that they didn't trade Jalen Waddle, because whenever Tua entered the league, he was not throwing to good quality NFL receivers. I mean, he was throwing to guys like Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and Lynn Bowden, and I completely understand wanting to keep Jalen Waddle for what will presumably be a new quarterback in 2026 and what could be a young quarterback at that. So I do think that Champ Kelly made a good decision to keep Jalen Waddle rather than ship him off and get a pick, because at the end of the day, you need good football players, and Jalen Waddle is not going to be a player that nets 2 first-round picks. So I do think the Dolphins did it right by retaining Jalen Waddle, but I definitely would have liked to have seen them also trade Bradley Chubb strictly from a financial perspective. Next up is Rashid Shaheed going to the Seattle Seahawks for a 4th and 5th round pick. Now, Rashid Shaheed is a player that a lot of people know of, but maybe not necessarily know his skill set or how good of a player he is. And I think in a perfect world, Shaheed could easily go for 1,000 yards in the right offense, but he hasn't had a great quarterback since entering the NFL, yet the flashes have been there. And the only way I think Seattle could come out of this as losers is if they do not sign Rashid Shaheed to an extension. And I think this is a little different than the Jacksonville situation, mainly because the Jags were out of bodies at wide receiver, and the Seahawks have, well, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is having an above-average year, I guess you could say, and they also have rookie 5th-round pick Torrey Horton, who is coming off of a 2-touchdown game and has 5 receiving touchdowns on the year. But why I think Seattle will be big winners from this trade is Corbin Smith, a reporter for the Emerald Spectrum, said that Seattle does not view this as a rental, and they hope to be able to sign him long-term and have a trio of Rashid Shaheed, JSN, and Torrey Horton. And as everyone knows, Sam Darnold has been incredible this year and is coming off of a game against Washington in which he threw for 282 yards and 4 touchdowns in the first half. And Shaheed is a player that is not just a deep threat, but a player that can help the run game and also the return game too. And by having a player like Rashid Shaheed, hopefully that also by extension, again, helps the run game become more efficient over time, as believe it or not, Seattle is 31st in yards per carry offensively in 2025. But internally, with how Seattle's year is going, there's no doubt they think they can win the Super Bowl, and rightfully so. Why would you think otherwise if you are Seattle? So I like this trade a lot for the Seahawks under the pretense they can work out an extension. And on the other side of this, I would argue that Tyler Shuck is a loser from the trade deadline. The Saints are obviously in a rebuilding year, and everyone knows it, but Tyler Shuck is a 26-year-old rookie and just had his number 2 option traded away in what may be the only year he legitimately gets a chance to prove himself as an NFL starter. Because you have to remember the deck is already stacked against Shuck, as if the Saints finish with a top 5 pick, they're more than likely going to select a quarterback unless Shuck plays out of his mind down the stretch of the 25 season and legitimately convinces the Saints that he's a better option than a 2026 draftee, who, by the way, would be significantly younger and with a lot more perceived potential. Shaheed was second on the team in targets in 2025 behind Chris Olave, of course, but after Shaheed, it's Juwan Johnson, Alvin Kamara, and a 32-year-old Brandon Cooks to give you an idea of who Tyler Shuck will be throwing the ball to down the stretch. The Bears also traded for former first-round pick Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and this is by every definition a dart throw. Unfortunately, the Bears received news that their big free agent signing from this past offseason in Dayo Odengbo tore his Achilles and is out for the year, and they needed pass rush help, especially after allowing 42 points to the Bengals in Week 9, and they made the trade for JTS. This is a player who I never thought was very good, and he was also a guy Tampa allowed to walk after 4 years as a former first-round pick. And with how much of a premium is placed on pass rush, not just by the Bucs, but with every team, if he was that good, he would still be a Buck. And there's also a reason Cleveland was willing to get rid of him for a 6th and 7th round swap, so if I had to name an official winner from this trade, I would say credit to Cleveland where it's due. But for Bears fans, I would not expect much from Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, though I would love to be proven wrong. The Sauce Gardner trade is up, and we're going to discuss the Colts side first. And I've went back and forth on this a lot. And where I stand with this trade for the Indianapolis Colts is, do I think the 2 first-round picks and Adonai Mitchell to give up for Sauce Gardner specifically is a lot? Yes, and I think that in some ways that would be an overpay for the player Sauce Gardner is. However, I think there needs to be context, and if there is one thing we discuss regularly on the channel, it's context within everything. There's also a part of me where you look at the Colts roster and you say, okay, Quentin Nelson's 29, Jonathan Taylor's in year 6, and this window is not going to be open for forever. And I know the cliche F them picks was popularized by the Rams, but there's also a part of me where it's like, look, we're not going to have this window open for 10 years. This is not Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen at 23 years old. We have a roster ready to win right now. Now, one thing that I do want to clarify within this trade for Indy, I do not think that you can look at this and say, if the Colts do not win the Super Bowl this year, then this trade is an automatic failure. I think the season they've had has been spectacular. I think Daniel Jones, outside of one game, has been awesome, and it's been a tremendous season for Indy. But whenever people get in the ultimate Super Bowl or bust mindset, I absolutely cannot stand that, because 99% of the time, you are going to be on the winning side, and you are also setting yourself up to be right, and then to also set yourself up for the fact after the Super Bowl concludes to say, see, I told you so. But within this trade for the Colts, I very much respect the fact that they went all in, they pushed all of their chips to the center of the table, and they basically said, hey, Daniel Jones is the guy. He's going to be the guy next year, and presumably we're going to give him a contract after this season, and he's going to be our guy for the next couple of years. Now, why we bring up Daniel Jones within the Sauce Gardner trade specifically is because of the 2 first-round picks aspect. Because if you trade away first-round picks, then the likelihood that you are going to select a franchise quarterback after round 1 obviously diminishes significantly compared to the possibility you select a quarterback in round 1 to become your franchise guy. Now, what is unfortunate for Daniel Jones and Colts fans is he had the worst game of the season right before the trade deadline, and within this trading 2 first-round picks for Sauce, not only are you committing financially to Sauce for the next several years, but you are now, by default, also committing to Daniel Jones as well because of the fact that you just traded 2 first-round picks. Will this prove to be a good trade for the Colts in the long run? We'll see, but Sauce Gardner is also a really good scheme fit for Lou Anarumo's defense, so I do like that, but in the grand scheme of do you think that Sauce Gardner is worth 2 firsts and Adonai Mitchell? I think that is a bit of an overpay, but I also think based on where the Colts are, with all of the guys that are in their primes right now, like Big Q, like Jonathan Taylor, and like DeForest Buckner, and even Sauce for that matter, I think this trade from a Colts perspective can easily be justified. The Dallas Cowboys traded a 2026 2, a 2027 1, and they had 2 first-round picks, so it will be the higher of the Cowboys and Packers picks going to the Jets, and defensive tackle Mazi Smith for Quinnen Williams. Now, whenever this trade was made, there was a lot of connection between Quinnen Williams and Micah Parsons, and I would much rather have Micah Parsons than Quinnen Williams, but what I think needs to be contextualized is the fact that Quinnen Williams is making significantly less money than Micah Parsons per year, and whenever you look at Quinnen Williams' contract, he He is under contract for a couple of years as he signed a 4 for $96 deal, while Micah signed a 4 for $186.5 deal. So that saves average of over $20 million per year by having Quinnen rather than Micah. And for clarity, I would much rather have Micah Parsons than Quinnen Williams if we're going player for player. But I think some people looked at this and immediately said that the Cowboys panicked and overreact, and I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think this is an A+ move by the Cowboys, but they significantly improved their defense from where they were previously, and they also cut dead weight on the roster in Mazi Smith, who, we can call it what it is, was a first-round bust as he was selected back in 2023. If I had to give this grade a move for Dallas, I would put it somewhere in the B- to B area for the Cowboys. Now, with the New York Jets, aside from the fan attachment to Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, I don't know how you can't come out of the 2025 trade deadline and think they are anything but big winners, because we've discussed this on the channel before, but the separation between the really good players on the Jets roster and the rest of the roster, if you will, is probably the biggest gap in the NFL, or was now that they've traded Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. And the top 6 or 7 or 8 guys in the Jets roster were all really good, but after that they had no depth. So for the Jets to be able to net 3 total first-round picks and a second-round pick from Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, and also take 2 former high-pick dart throws in Adonai Mitchell and Mazi Smith, is a tremendous process by first-year GM Darren Muji, and that to me is the biggest takeaway for the Jets. And specifically with Adonai Mitchell, if you guys have been following the channel for a while, then you guys know I absolutely loved Adonai Mitchell coming out of Texas, and I don't think his career is over. I think in some ways it's just getting started. But for the Jets specifically this year, their leaders in receiving yards, outside of Garrett Wilson of course, are Mason Taylor, Tyler Johnson, Breece Hall, Isaiah Davis, and Josh Reynolds. And if Adonai Mitchell cannot go into that room and at least be at minimum a wide receiver 3, then he will be a draft bust and a disappointing player at the NFL level. But to take a dart throw on a player that is as physically gifted as Adonai Mitchell, while also receiving 2 first-round picks, and then a 1 and a 2 for Quinnen and also Mazi Smith. Now, admittedly, I'm a little less hopeful for Mazi Smith than I am Adonai Mitchell, as I like Adonai a lot more as a player, or as a prospect, if you will. But this was an all-around great process by Darren Muji, and the one big thing that I want to hammer home is, yes, Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams are great football players, but it really wouldn't matter because they're not a player or 2 away from legitimately competing for the AFC East. Even with Sauce and Quinnen Williams, they were 1-7 on the year. So for the Jets to receive as much draft capital as they did, and again, what also should be remembered is Sauce is 25, Quinnen is 27. By the time they would have actually been able to really rebuild this thing the right way, Sauce would have arguably been out of his prime because corner play is extremely volatile every year, and there's a possibility one day that Sauce just doesn't have it anymore and his play falls off a cliff. That happens at that position, and by the time the Jets would be really good, Quinnen would be pushing 30, if not 30 years old. So all around, I think the Jets are tremendous winners from the 2025 trade deadline because they are finally hitting the reset button and they are doing everything from a process standpoint the right way. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe as we are closing in on 220,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.